Simon Mayo's
Simon Mayo's Confessions. That's the thing. I should have included my name there at the beginning. If we use your confession, then you get a smart speaker, and that's what's going to happen today for Will. Will, thank you. Father Simon, Monsignor Matt, and Sister Holly. I have a confession to make. It was a promising start.
Good.
Many years ago, I was a soldier. Now, normally at this point, I go, that's not going to make it.
No.
Well, a part-time one. I served in the Territorial Army. One night, a long time ago, my unit, no names, no pack drill, was on our annual camp at an undisclosed, war-ravaged, desolate location, let's call it Lincolnshire.
Right.
During this 2-week camp, we honed our soldier skills, shot lots of blanks, screamed a lot, and stuck grass in our helmets to blend into the Lincolnshire countryside. One evening, I was volunteered to join the guard and keep the camp safe. Now, I was a keen soldier. While some saw guard duty as a chore, I didn't mind at all. The guard would be mounted in the evening and maintained throughout the night, with each of us taking turns to stand our stag, as it was called, for a couple of hours before returning to the guardhouse for a mug of tea and a bit of rest. I was lucky enough to get an early stag, followed by a second in the middle of the night, and then the last one just before dawn. The first stag passed without incident. Rifle in hand, I maintained a presence at the camp gate, observed passing traffic, and kept an eye on those entering and leaving the camp. During this time, I noticed the farm gate just across the road and a number of cows looking over the fence back at me. I immediately drew upon all my army training to realize that these cows were no threat, and I carried on with my important and very responsible task. Later that night, I mounted my second guard. It was quieter now, pitch black, with a solitary street lamp pointing down on the camp gates. So not actually pitch black then, but never mind. After a while, I tuned into the noise of the cows in the field opposite, mooing gently in the darkness, and I wandered over for a closer look. As I neared the gate, I caught sight of a large box truck idling on the road outside the camp. The quiet of the night was broken by a voice. Simon, you might want to insert a Ray Winston type voice here.
How?
He didn't sound like Ray Winston, but you have a limited range.
Yeah, that is, true.
Here, mate, you got a torch? Said the voice in the darkness. Yes, of course I do. I replied as two dark shadows appeared in front of me. Shine it over here then, says one of the guys. I flicked on the torch and I shone it towards the two individuals who are now standing near the gate of the field containing the cows. Down here, shine it on the lock, says the other guy, sounding exactly the same as the first guy. I flashed the torch on the chain and padlock just as one of the men snipped the chain with a set of bolt cutters. We forgot our keys, lad. We got to get these things to market first thing. The gate swung open, the truck reversed into the field, and before long, the two men had loaded the cows into the van. The truck revved and heaved its way out of the field and back onto the road. The driver wound down the window and gave me a cheery wave, shouting, "Thanks for your help, chum," through a fug of blue cigarette smoke. Different times, Father Simon. Now, I wasn't a country lad, but I marvelled at the hard-working British farmers who were putting in such a hard shift. These stout yeomen were on their way to market to sell their animals, and I had done my little bit for Queen and Country. Checking my watch, it was time to be relieved, and I returned to the guard hut for a mug of tea and 40 winks. A couple of hours later, I was back on guard again for my final stag of the night. The fingers of dawn were starting to spread across the horizon, and the darkness was rolling away.
Oh, pictures with words.
I took a walk around the perimeter of the camp and returned towards the camp gates. All was good until I noticed another vehicle parked at the entrance to the cow field opposite the camp. As I approached, I saw a figure in the field walking in ever-widening circles. These country folk, I thought. As I neared, the man in the field saw me and he started to come over looking quite agitated. Excuse me. In fact, excuse me, he shouted.
Yes.
Have you seen my cows? Will then says, Simon, as I know your other accent is West Country farmer, you might have to do this.
Oh, no.
Excuse me, have you seen my cows? Well, no. They went to market a couple of hours ago in a lorry. Two men came and they said they'd lost their keys. The man seemed ever more agitated now and was holding a length of chain in his hands. They've cut through the ruddy chain and stolen my cows! At this point, Simon, a lot of light bulbs started going on in my head.
Oh, really?
I had been involved, albeit unwillingly, in a modern-day case of cattle rustling. I'd like to think that the stolen cows went on to live out their lives in a field of knee-high green grass and died of old age, but I fear that might not have been the case. I played down my part in the cow's disappearance and how I may have aided and abetted by holding the torch while these wrong-uns had actually cut the chain. Also, my dereliction of duty in that I neglected to make a note of the vehicle reg, and I couldn't give a description of the two burly men. Well, they were burly. So I seek forgiveness for my sins. In my eagerness to serve, I fell short of the high standards expected of myself and my regiment. I regret the role I played in this unfortunate incident and hope to be absolved of this momentary lapse of judgment. I really was very keen, if you can bear that in mind. Well, keenness obviously might affect the weak-willed, but let's see what happens here. Sister Holly speaks first.
Well, gosh, it was all such a mess, really. I just feel like you had the best intentions, really.
Yes.
You felt, these people were honest people, and actually they weren't very honest people. I do think it was rather daft. As soon as you saw someone cutting a chain, surely you must have thought for a second, maybe this is a bit dodgy, or maybe I should report this or something.
I think Will's an idiot.
He took a long time to get to that point, and that was a bit weird. Also, if I was a cow burglar, I would bring my own torch. Who would rely on another person for a torch? Besides the point. Anyway, for that reason, I'm not forgiving Will, because he should have known in the moment that these guys were dodgy.
Certainly the way Will describes it, you think, okay, it's like the two bad guys in 101 Dalmatians in the van with the peak caps. They're obviously criminals.
Yeah, Will's not that bright, is he? But is it a crime to be not that bright? No, it's not. But still, would have been better if you'd not been using your torch to help them take those cows. And it's very difficult to find whatever means of forgiving here. I'm struggling a little. Let's just say, at least Will probably knows that he wasn't too bright and has come in with a confession. So good for him for fronting up. And we should applaud that. Yeah, he's serving the Queen and country, not that well by the sound of things, but he's still serving them. They're all getting served. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
Okay, not very well argued, I don't think.
No, I don't think so either.
People's verdict, please, for Will, forgiveness or not, 61054. First word is Simon. Before the news, a confession from Will involving the Territorial Army, Lincolnshire, cattle rustling, and an complete inability, not just to say inability, but to spot a burglar and a wrong-un, even though it was quite dark. The people's verdict is in like this.
So Isabel from Shropshire says, not forgiven. How could you be so naive? Even as a non-country lad. Surely it was suspicious that they were picking up cows in the middle of the night and they cut through the chain? Definitely an avoidable mistake.
Yes.
Brenda from Suffolk, forgiven. To be fair, as a non-country person myself, I wouldn't have thought cow thievery was even a thing. Seems a lot of effort. And where are you even hiding the cows? I think it's fair that Will assumed they were honest men. Samantha in Aberdeen says, forgiven. Will seems like an honest and lovely man. Maybe the Territorial Army wasn't the best place for him, but he seems sweet. The cow stealers took advantage of that, so you have to forgive.
Do you?
Which, I mean, I thought I was bad. Goodness me.
I was very generous, I thought.
Very generous.
Anyway, Will gets the smart speaker, and so could you if you send us a confession and we use it. It's confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. If you send a confession and we use it, you get a smart speaker. It's confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. And don't forget, the new podcast will be with you on Friday, so you don't have to miss a thing. In fact, you'll get included in all kinds of confessions that we're not really allowed to broadcast.
Yeah.
Kind of, for some reason, a podcast is different, so so we can get away with it. Today's confession, I'm going to give this a PG certificate, I think,
lovely.
because it's a little bit distasteful. I think it's perfectly fine for family listening. It comes from Caleb. Thank you, Caleb. Dear Confessions team, Father Simon, Sister Holly, the righteous one, and Brother Matt, can I have him on my jury if I need him, please?
Yeah.
I'm not sure it works. The jury system doesn't work like that. My confession relates to an incident way back in the mid-70s. We were living in a small semi-detached cottage in a village in the south of Scotland. The house had been owned by my grandparents, who moved out to a flat to allow us to make room for our expanding young family. But my grandfather continued to tend to the garden, was very proud of his strawberries, potatoes, garden peas, and onions. This was a grand tradition and a source of family pride. The Industrial Revolution has moved most of us a long way from our agrarian roots, but not my grandfather. These rustic ways must be preserved in difficult times. We don't all have Farmer Clarkson's Amazon Prime-sized pockets or access to hundreds of acres of farmable land, so we make do with what we have, and the taste of this produce was second to none. Now, my wife was heavily pregnant at this time with number 2 son, and she was coping with the potty training of number 1 son. Number 1s and number 2s everywhere.
Thank you.
As you can see. This, as you might remember, Father Simon, is a trying time, always dashing hither and thither, encouraging, waiting, emptying, and repeat.
Yes.
Endlessly until sorted.
Yeah.
The year of our troubles. Holly doesn't know anything about this at all. But, it'll all, one day. The year of our troubles was an exceptionally hot summer. Tempers frayed, patience was tested, calm, rational discussion was a rarity. Why be mellow when you can bellow? The neighbours and most of the street must have known, movement by movement, how the progress of the potty training was progressing. Now, the bathroom in the cottage was upstairs, and so, rather than climb the stairs with a liquid-filled potty every time, we had a success. My wife took to disposing of the contents by throwing them out of the back kitchen window. This might cause an intake of breath from your more delicate listeners. Yes, Holly, that's you. But in the heat of the moment, it was a sensible and eco-friendly thing to do, I would suggest. Now, immediately outside this window was Grandfather's onion patch.
Of course.
His onions were famous in the village and won various awards in previous years. This particular summer... Pull yourself together, man.
Come on.
This particular summer, his onions appeared to be thriving like never before and grew to previously unattainable sizes and girths. Yes. The onion has been prized for centuries, as you know, Father Simon, not just for its taste, but for its healing properties. And now, here were my grandfather's onions, spreading happiness across the land. He was amazed and very proud of the many congratulatory comments, the various horticultural shows he exhibited said onions at, sweeping up the first prize at each and every show. Maybe the reviews were right that these were the greatest onions of all time. But what was his secret? Well, now my wife and I didn't have the heart to enlighten him as to the probable reason for their outstanding growth, but we knew and we kept it a secret from everyone until now. Maybe Farmer Clarkson can use this information and create another best-selling product. Just don't tell anyone about the secret ingredient, especially West Oxfordshire County Council. No. Needless to say, neither of us ever ate any of the aforesaid crop. Caleb says, sadly, my wife passed away in 2022 without confessing to this, and so I am asking forgiveness for her and also for myself from the many people who must have eaten my grandfather's prize onions that year without knowing particularly why they were so prized. But we did, yes, and we didn't eat any. Well, that apparently is a horticultural secret. But anyway, exposed now by Caleb. What do you say, Sister Holly?
Well, this confession is really rather gross, isn't it? The community were eating onions with potty contents on them. I think that's pretty nasty.
Circle of life.
I don't think it's circle of life. I think it's sick and wrong, if you ask me.
Sick
and that's why
wrong.
I don't forgive.
Okay. T'other brother.
Well, it's an innovative way, isn't it, of doing the manure? We all put the manure on the vegetables, don't we? So this is one way of doing that. And
eco-friendly.
It is very eco-friendly, isn't
Waste
it?
not, want not.
Quite right. Getting the nitrogen and everything else in there, probably sulfur. I don't know. Anyway, there's all of that's going on, and also presumably at some point they stopped the potty training, and so the onions weren't quite as big. So unless they decided that they were going to carry on in the garden. Anyway, who knows? For that reason, I'm going to forgive.
What reason?
The reason of the onions.
You've just given.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it's the people's verdict. Please do you forgive Caleb for his potty training and onion and grandfather-themed confession. 61054 is our text number. First word has to be Simon. So, more Tuesday joy in just a moment. Before the news, we heard an agricultural confession from Caleb involving potty training and the grandfather's onions.
Yes.
Anyway, with hilarious consequences. Here's the people's verdict.
A lot of forgiveness today. Pam and Adrian say, now we finished chuckling, our vote is forgiven. Poor woman was pregnant. Upstairs toilet, hot summer, totally ingenious solution. Rita in Belfast says, for heaven's sake, what do people think makes food grow?
Yes.
Manure. Urine in compost heaps is highly recommended. Forgiven, of course. And Pete says, forgiven. When myself and my twin were potty training years ago, we lived in a house with no running water, a little shed in the garden, and the best rhubarb in the village.
Okay, so maybe there are more stories to come. Confessions at greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Gather round, 30 minutes to 6 o'clock. Confession time. Thank you for all the confessions coming into confessions at greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Today's comes from Mr. T. Thank you, Mr. T. Father Simon, Archdeacon Matt, Holy Holly, Sister Susie, unless Sister Susie is still on tour, offering sustenance to the people of the world from the drinks trolley. Mm-hmm. That is precisely what she's doing.
Yeah.
I'd like to unburden myself of a misdemeanor that has weighed heavily on my conscience for many a year. With the Euros now entering the squeaky bottom stage, given the underlying football theme of this tale, I thought it was appropriate time to confess. I take you back to the 1980s and Essex University. At the time, one of the new breed of more radical and angry establishments, rather than one of the more higher echelons of learning that I'm sure was frequented by the likes of Bunny Mortimer and Monty Greenacres.
Them.
From last week. Yes, this is a blatant attempt to get Matt on side with his class warrior head on.
Correct.
After a tough few weeks and the stress of end-of-term exams, a seemingly endless summer now stretched ahead of us, with the opportunity to return to our respective homes to get our washing done. But before that, there was the not inconsiderable hurdle of surviving last night on campus. That's what today's tale is about.
Okay.
I was a member of the football club. Well, at least if it was the rugby club, you'd be in serious trouble.
Get on. Yeah.
We had agreed to rendezvous in the Union Bar at 7 p.m. sharp. Although we never had the opportunity to play a team from the far-flung corners of Uzbekistan, we thought ourselves as a fine bunch of lads, if a little raucous after a few pints of shandy. Well, some 5 hours or so later, said rendezvous, and we were wending our way rather precariously across the square in good voice with a hearty rendition of You Spin Me Round by Dead or Alive. One of our party, let's call him Hazza, because that's what we called him, spied the fountain in the centre of the square and made a beeline for that. Removing his shoes and socks, he was soon in, splashing around like an overexcited toddler and continuing to belt out Pete Burns' disco anthem, now complete with dance moves and lots of water. We whooped for a few moments, applauding Hazza's impromptu celebrations before continuing our journey to one of the campus flats to carry on marking the end of another year at university. Hazza soon raced past us, shoes and socks in hand, and it was then I noticed an almost perfect trail of red footprints.
Oh, no.
I shouted at Hazza to stop, and he slumped against a pillar. I knelt down to take a look at the soles of his feet. I should have warned you, it's a little bit crunchy.
Oh, here we are, everyone.
Soles of his feet looking like they'd been on the receiving end of a deranged surgeon. As I stood up, I heard a crunch and realized the source of his injuries. Fragments of glass from a broken pint glass were strewn across the tarmac, and most of them were now embedded in his feet. After a brief consultation, we decided that the best course of action was to deliver Hazza to the security office. So, hoisting him between two of us like some benign and grinning Roman emperor, we set off. 5 minutes later, he was duly deposited with one of the campus officers agreeing to drive him to hospital as he was bleeding quite badly now. Off we went to continue. I should have mentioned there's a lot of blood.
Right, okay.
Off we went to continue our evening, but about an hour later, one of us, I don't think it was me, developed a conscience and wondered if we should go and check how our wounded comrade was getting on. So the first team captain, who was on antibiotics and so therefore had not been imbibing, grabbed the keys to the minibus and we all piled into the back and set off for the hospital. After a short journey, with a resurrection of You Spin Me Round, we arrived at our destination. Tumbling from the back of the van, we eventually found our way to A&E. You can just imagine how welcome these guys were. And asked a very weary-looking receptionist if she knew the whereabouts of our friend. We had to revert to his full name, as apparently Hazza had not been admitted. She pointed at a row of chairs and said she would ask a senior nurse to come and talk to us. A short while later, a rather stern-looking nurse arrived. I decided to be party spokesperson and asked how Hazza was getting on. In a strong Scottish accent, she said,
Here it comes.
No chance.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But with a distinct softening of her features, she looked at us sadly and said, I'm so sorry to have to tell you, he's gone. Pardon me, I said. I'm afraid your friend has gone to a better place. Now, she hadn't said the D word, but I could see it in her eyes. He has, she continued, gone home.
Right.
He's no longer with us. He has checked out.
He has checked out. Yeah.
He can't have died. He only came in with cut feet, I shouted, shocked and stunned at what we thought had been an innocuous injury had resulted in the untimely passing of our friend. We all, I'm afraid to say, burst into tears. Sobbing at the shock news of our friend's demise. We made quite a scene. How could we have misjudged this situation so badly? We made quite a scene, and only slowly, I'm afraid, did we hear the nurse say, no, the better place is university. He's gone back. He's left. He's gone back to university. He's gone home. He's checked out the hospital.
Right.
Not checked out of this life. Anyway, said the nurse, this time with an exasperated rather than kindly look on shake of her head. Father Simon asked for forgiveness for wasting precious NHS resources from an hour in Bevan, and for all those who have followed him in this noble calling. The last thing the night shift needed was a bunch of inebriated footballers turning up at 2 a.m, albeit that we did so with the best of intentions. I do suspect that the nurse knew full well what she was up to, however. Anyway, yours in penitence, Mr. T, is asking for forgiveness from Sister Holly. No chance, by the way.
As soon as you said you were a member of the football club, that for me was the start of the unforgiving nature of this, really. The fact that you all, got into the minibus, you were singing away. I mean, the fact that you didn't help your friend, you didn't see the glass in the first place actually on the floor and stop him from walking in it, that would have really stopped all of this. And then the fact that you were crying in A&E when they're very, very busy people. And so for all of those reasons, not forgiving at all.
Brother Matthew.
Well, I think we all know that it was the nurse knew exactly what she was doing with her. He's gone to a better place. He's left us. He's not here anymore. And she knew it because all of these euphemisms that we always use. And it turns out he was fine. He was a different hospital. So I think she was enjoying it. And she was no doubt going back and telling all of her colleagues, I've finally used the he's gone to a better place thing. They were all in tears. It was hilarious. And there were a bunch of football people as well, so even better. So forgiven, everyone wins.
People's verdict, please. 61054, first word is Simon. Do you forgive Mr. T? 61054 on the text. Just before the news, we heard from Mr. T a confession back from the 80s about last day on campus. The football team, they'd been in the bar, then Hazza's feet got all cut up. He ended up in A&E, and they all thought he'd moved on and passed on and checked out of this earth. But it was just the nurse winding them up. Anyway, they behaved in an inappropriate way, I believe, in a hospital, and the people's verdict, here it is.
But there's plenty of forgiveness tonight. Mike from Watford says, forgiven. I agree with Matt. That nurse was definitely pranking you, so if anything, you gave her a good laugh for the evening rather than wasting her time. Stephen New Brighton says, forgiven. We all know that once cold drinks have been taken, our emotions are heightened and the team's thoughts were in the right place. And Linda says, I'm in Essex right now, very close to the university, about to go to my first ever Pilates class. Hysterical confession. You have to forgive.
Well, thank you very much indeed for all of that. If you have a confession for us, we'll swap it for a smart speaker, if we use it, of course. Confessions at greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Okay, so it's confession time. Let's hand out another smart speaker. This one, okay, well, this one, I'm going to give it a PG.
Oh.
Just for kind of like overall flavour, I think. It has a sort of a coarse flavour, I think.
Oh, does it?
So therefore, Paul, has sent in this confession. Simon and the Holy Collective, may I take you back to a Saturday in 1996, the year the incident I wish to confess to you took place. I was 16. I used to work at weekends in my local Woolworths in Yeovil. I feel as though we can be specific, given that it doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist, does it? No.
One of my colleagues, I use the term loosely, was a beret and cravat wearing Amdram fanatic.
Oh my goodness.
Actually called Quentin.
Wow.
Really?
He went to school with me and used to hang around with kids of a similar ilk to himself. They were all members of the drama club, need I say more?
No.
He was often asking me about David Hare plays that he'd been reading. Did I rate Racing Demon higher than Plenty or possibly Pravda? Well, I had no idea what he was talking about. And then he'd ask me what I thought of Jack Kerouac. I wondered if he'd just signed for Plymouth Argyle. But this seemed to just trigger another bout of Quentin's existential angst. I don't think we've had the word existential used in a confession for a while. Anyway, I don't think Paul and Quentin are best friends.
No.
Anyway, on this particular Saturday, I was put on the music section of the store, the Woolworths in Yeovil, with guess who? Yep, it was Quentin, who was being his normal, overly dramatic self and wearing a poncho, as well as over his Woolworths outfit.
Of course.
And talking about Norman Mailer. He was also sucking up to the team leader. It's creative non-fiction, he would say. You really must try The Armies of the Night. It won a Pulitzer. We really should be selling it here. Well, this plea to get Woolworths to sell high literature fell on deaf ears. A quarter pound of humbugs and gummy snakes, yes. Mailer and David Hare, quite unlikely. Anyway, while he was at the far end of the counter serving a customer, the team leader asked me to put on an album which would then be played over the shop's sound system to entertain the customers, of which there were many, mostly women with younger children. This is relevant. She suggested Blue is the Colour, which was the new album by The Beautiful South. She also stated in no uncertain terms to miss out the first track, which was, of course, Don't Marry Her.
Oh, yeah.
As soon as she walked away, Quentin came bustling over in his poncho and he asked what was going on. He hated not being the one who was being tasked by the team leader. So I told him exactly, well, almost exactly, what had been requested. She wants to hear Beautiful South, Blue is the Colour, lovely album. I then took my leave and headed over to the Pick and Mix to wait for the carnage to begin. And sure enough, Quentin put on the album, put it on the turntable, swung the stylus arm across and dropped it down at the start of side 1, track 1. And the opening bars of Don't Marry Her rang out over the shop sound system. Think of you with pipe and slippers, it began. Think of her in bed, laying there, watching telly. Think of me instead. By this point, the team leader was looking up and she realized there was a problem. Jackie Abbott continues her vocal. I'll never go so old and flabby, that could never be. From my vantage point at the Pick and Mix, I saw a furious team leader hurtling across the shop floor towards the music counter at the speed of what can only be described as 1,000 gazelles. But it wasn't quite fast enough to get there before the chorus of this song started. And for those who don't know, the lyrics of the album version, very, very different to the single version. It contains some expletives that aren't appropriate for the ears of anyone under 18. Needless to say, there were a lot of very, very angry, disgruntled parents heading to the music counter to register their displeasure. And some even left the shop at haste with very confused children in tow. Some were crying. Why did they have to leave the shop? And this, Father Simon, was my handiwork. I hadn't thought it through, but Quentin took the rap, so that's okay.
Yeah.
I need forgiveness not from misleading Quentin. He's in a poncho, for heaven's sake. But for the fact that many you can't work in Woolworths in a poncho. But for the fact that many parents had to answer some very awkward conversations with children to explain A, why they had to cut short a shopping trip, and B, possibly what certain words actually meant. Also, Father Simon, I wonder if I am in any way responsible for helping the demise of Woolworths by my reckless behaviour. Yours, Paul. Well, I can see his point because clearly Woolworths sales were hit by the fact that these people thought, I don't want to listen to this filth.
Exactly.
I am leaving the store. I'm going to go to W.H. Smith's where you don't get this kind of rubbish. Actually, the radio version is much better than the original version. The original version is a little bit... So I can see what the problem was, and the poor team leader obviously just couldn't run fast enough to make it to the turntable on time. Something I'm familiar with from back in the day. Sister Holly.
I mean, strangely enough, I didn't actually know the album version of this until about a week ago when 3 people suggested this as the track for the Drive Time drama, and I looked up the lyrics and was really rather shocked.
Yes.
I have to say, though, with this, I am actually kind of on Quentin's side. You know, he was theatrical, he had a nice time. I respect the poncho. I feel like I would have maybe been friends with Quentin. Does that make me a dreadful person?
You
I don't think it does.
can't work in Woolworths in a poncho.
I think you could. I think he would rock that poncho. And so I think what Paul did was actually quite mean there. And Quentin took the rap at the end of the day. So he was the good guy. And so that's why I'm not forgiving Paul at all.
Men in this country should not wear ponchos under any circumstance
Really?
for any reason.
Unless they're Mexican, allowed to wear them if you're Mexican people wearing the poncho.
Okay.
That's okay.
Brother Matthew.
So I love the fact this is set in. I've lost count of the number of times we've had a confession set in Woolies where it basically ends with them thinking that's probably why Woolies is no longer with us. My thoughts on Quentin in his poncho and his beret and his Jack Kerouac. Stick your Jack Kerouac in the pick and mix there, Quentin. That will be my thoughts on that. But actually, the reason I love this is because I'm seeing the team leader as Holly if Simon were to ever play the wrong version. Where she is going to come racing, barreling through the door, throwing herself on the mic.
Get that mic off.
Absolutely. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
Okay, all right. People's verdict, please. 61054. The people's verdict for Paul. Do you forgive or no? 61054. Reaction to today's confession, which came from Paul, and it was the story of Quentin in a poncho in Woolworths and an inappropriate use of Beautiful South, side 1, track 1, from a new album causing mass panic and embarrassment. The people's verdict is in.
So Chris in Weston-super-Mare says, tonight's confession is forgiven. I had a similar experience when I was the record department manager at W.H. Smith's with Ian Dury's album and some rather juicy expletives.
Yes.
But Miranda in East London says, not forgiven. Do you know how difficult it is to mellow a child's curiosity? Those parents would be fending off questions about rude words for the rest of the day. Total nightmare. And Doug from Portchester says, forgiven. My wife bought that album and couldn't wait to play it in the car on the way home with our 2 young children in the back. Needless to say, some desperate grabbing at the volume and CD eject button as the car swerved down the road.
Yes, quite a few stories like that. Thank you very much indeed for that. And if you have a confession, please send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk.